Alright, so I'm going to just start off by reading this. God is an acronym for ground of decidability. Basically, God doesn't explain the possibility of actuality or non-actuality. It simply explains what the difference is. That is, how actuality is, how existence is, meaning why is existence this way rather than some other way. That has to be decidable. So that's the ground of decidability, is the fact that how existence is has to be decidable. So if you had two options where you have one, eternal actuality, where, say, existence has been true forever, that's undecidable because all of the features of it, you have no way of explaining anything because there's nothing beyond that, you see. So one eternal actuality is not going to work. But that doesn't mean it's not excluded. It just means that that's non-actuality. It doesn't actualize. So possibilities aren't excluded or included. And so the actuality is just the configuration of ideas that where actuality is able to reflexively explain its own properties. So the idea that works is dividing up eternity into intervals of actuality. So it's an eternal regress of intervals of actuality. Now the details of this would take about a 600-page proof. But for now, you can see that we can use the past interval of actuality as a way of explaining the present interval. That means it can't be circular reasoning, so there has to be something like a model, and the model is what explains it. So it's like not self-referential, but it's like indirectly reflexive. And then there's complications. There's things that can't be fully decided, and then you need the previous version of the model in like the previous past, because it's an eternal regress. You need more than just the past. You need like the past to the past, and that's going to help project certain features of existence that couldn't be explained by the first one, like all the quantum indeterminacy at the bottom of existence. Those events aren't simply unpredictable, they're undecidable. It's like a residual undecidability. So I'm basically talking about something like Gödel's theorem applied to actuality itself. So I'm going to be doing like a bunch of podcasts about this. I hesitate to get into any of the details because I need to draw. But this model, it is composed of qualitative numbers. And it goes from 0 through 9, and like the 0 through 9 is actually being explained by the previous version of it, which the qualitative number 9 contains 0 through 9. But the qualitative version, actually, there's two versions of 0 through 9. There's one version and a diluted version. And then the 9 part has 0 through 9 qualitative numbers and 0 through 9 quantitative numbers. So it's explaining why both of those ideas are true. And it explains why it has 0 through 9. You see what I mean by reflexivity? So it's not referencing itself, but the previous version of it is indirectly referencing it. It's explaining the general features of it with the specific features of a previous version of it. I know that sounds like word salad to people, but I'll go into these details. Also, these intervals of actuality, they turn into actuality without actuality, and that's where the model is coming from. It's like the potential for the next, and then the previous interval, it's not non-actuality, it's non-actuality without non-actuality. Just think of like a yin and yang of concepts, where you have like black without black and non-black without non-black. So the non-actuality without non-actuality, the without non-actuality part is the model that's explaining the present interval of actuality. And how that even gets its power to do that comes from the previous model. Specifically, it's the zero part. Because zero, it's qualitative zero, so it actually means something, has like a negative and a positive of concepts. So it's actually the openly closed open closure and the closely open closed openings. And those are like the most fundamental categories. How much time do I have? So the openly closed open closure means that the open is the reference to the past, and the closure is the explaining the present features of existence. And then the openly closed part is the part where it's not entirely closed, and so you need extra information from the previous model. Basically, I know you can't visualize this, but like all the events that can't be decided, the quantum events, and even like the masses of all the elementary particles and the constants. Like, I can explain why they come in threes, but the actual specific numbers, first of all, they're qualities, they're not quantities. That's really important. And the qualities, you can't pin them down. My point is that they have to be explained by the previous model. And it's basically amounts to, it's the same as before. This is why an eternal regress is what's needed, because certain aspects you have to just keep deferring to the previous and saying, why is it this way? Because it's the same as before. It's symmetrical. Okay, I didn't want to get too much into that because it might get too complicated. But what I mean by features of existence or features of actuality, I mean like existence is divided up into 36 scales, and those 36 scales are divided into 6 groups of 6. So we have like an inorganic or chemical realm, then you have a biological or organic realm, then you have like a perception realm. I call these hyperscales. They're like groups of scales. And then a conceptual hyperscale, and then an intergalactic hyperscale, and an extragalactic hyperscale. So, say like the biological hyperscale. The first scale is abdomen, thorax, and head, sort of like a bee. It's actually in basically almost every animal. It's just that it's disguised. It's just observable in insects easier. And so the next scale down is organ system, organ tissue, and then each hyperscale has 3 pairs of scales, and that was just the first pair. And then you go down, and the next pair of scales has outer cell, nucleus, and then nucleolus, which is like a large, very large molecule. And you'll notice there's a pattern. It's like a combination of units, a smaller combination of units, and then one big unit. And so the combination of units are grouped together in one way, but then the nucleolus and the nucleus are grouped together in size, sort of. But that happens on every scale. There's this pattern where it's grouped in one way, but it's also grouped in the other in another way. So it's like got 2 and 1 parts, but it also has 1 and 2 parts, if that makes any sense. But I'll show you pictures of all this. Anyway, I gotta go.